let's begin. So I have about 20 minutes to cover this very broad topic. I have no disclosures, and I'll just start with a very interesting case that I saw as a resident. This was a patient that was a domestic abuse victim, and as you can see, somebody stuck a knife in her head, and the tip of the knife was very close centrally in the posterior fossa. We did a head CT, which shows that the knife does penetrate through the bone of the clivus into the retroclival cistern. And there's a very important vascular structure in that region, of course, the basilar artery. So this is a very tenuous situation. They did a cerebral angiogram, and as you can see, the tip of the knife actually contacts the basilar artery but does not penetrate it. So this patient was very lucky. The knife was removed, leaving a linear fracture through the clivus, as you can see here. And just as an incidental, somewhat funny add-on here, the report said interval removal of life instead of knife. So now, in this 20 minutes, I'm just going to cover two major parts. We're going to talk about intracranial hemorrhage first, and then we're going to talk about herniation. Mostly complications of herniation, which I think is a little bit more interesting than talking about midline shift. I really only have two teaching points, which is that you should always pay attention to the bone-brain interface, essentially the margins of the cerebral hemispheres, and especially along the skull base. These are areas where you frequently get hemorrhage, where fractures basically meet the brain. These are the most common areas to find things, and also the most common and easily missed findings if they're small, because there's a lot of structures, there's a lot of variation along these borders. Number two is if you see a fracture, you should definitely look around the fracture for any kind of soft tissue injury. That could be a scalp hematoma, or intracranially could be an extra-axial hemorrhage, could be a small hemorrhagic or non-hemorrhagic contusion right next door. Conversely, if you see something intracranially that's a focal hemorrhage or contusion, look at the bone right next to it, because you might see a fracture. And I'll show you an example of this, because while making this lecture, I actually did catch a fracture that I missed. So let's start with part one here. So we're going to talk a little bit about epidural hematomas. So this is a 25-year-old female that fell downstairs, has a squamosal temporal bone fracture, which you can see right here, essentially non-displaced. And then you see...
All right. So as we think about fractures of the extremities, they can be differentiated into three major types. Traumatic fractures are going to be those that occur as a result of a single episode of high impact force. Pathologic fractures are those that are going to require very little force because that underlying bone is already abnormal. And then stress fractures are those that occur as a result of multiple repetitive forces on bone. So pathologic fractures in adults are most commonly the result of underlying neoplastic disease, either primary or secondary. Think about pathologic fractures if that patient doesn't have a known history of injury, or if the fractures are happening in an unusual location. So the best example of this is at the lesser trochanter. Here we can see this woman with a history of cervical cancer has a displaced fracture of the lesser trochanter. The underlying CT much better demonstrates the underlying osseous lesion involving both the lesser trochanter and intertrochanteric region. So after metastatic disease, the next most common cause of pathologic fracture in adults is going to be multiple myeloma. Here's the right humerus in a 43-year-old woman with multiple myeloma. We can see a pathologic fracture through a lesion of the proximal humeral shaft. All of the features that suggest there's an underlying lesion are present. You'll see that thinning of the humeral cortex, scalloping of the endosteum, and loss of the normal trabecular pattern in the region of the lesion. Not all pathologic fractures have to occur through malignant lesions. So on the right, we can see a pathologic fracture through the proximal humerus in a benign unicameral bone cyst. Within the lesion, you can see tiny spicules of bone forming that fragment, fallen fragment sign. Stress fractures are going to be further subdivided into insufficiency and fatigue types. So insufficiency fractures occur when a normal force is applied to abnormal bone, and abnormalities of the bone which can cause these insufficiency fractures are provided in this list here. The most common are going to be osteoporosis and irradiation. And in these images on the left, we can see a cuboid stress fracture, which is related to osteopenia. Fatigue fractures happen when you apply excessive repeated force to normal bone, as we can see in this fibular stress fracture on the right. The sacrum is a really common place for insufficiency fractures, especially in our patient population. So these can be very easily missed on radiographs because there's often overlying stool and bowel gas.
So this is the last presentation, I guess. This time I will talk a little bit about AI in whole body trauma scans and what we're doing with those ideas and where the limitations are. So what is the role of AI in trauma and emergency radiology in general? If you look around, you will find things like this. This is from 2019. AI systems achieved cancer detection accuracy comparable to an average breast radiologist in retrospective settings, and has to be tested a little bit more. This was published in 2019. So there's always this threat, will AI replace radiologists soon? And rest assured, I will tell you a little bit, it won't. But nevertheless, here's another one that's just published in February. Our AI system matched radiology residents' performance, meanwhile significantly outperformed non-radiology resident diagnostic accuracy for most considered X-ray findings like pneumothorax, pleural effusion, and lung lesions. This was tested in an emergency room setting, and the conclusion is therefore it might serve as clinical decision support for non-radiology residents. So what's wrong with this? For me, the answer is very simple. AI will replace radiologists first who are not there anyhow. In other words, if there's no attending during the 24-hour coverage who generates the final report, of course people will look for alternatives. In general, I've written down a little bit how I think the development will happen. We are still in the screening phase. So the AI systems we have right now are more or less concentrated on extracting a certain feature out of our data sets. And we are away from having follow-up analysis, so longitudinal comparisons are still rare. They don't predict outcomes in most cases, and we are far away from autonomous systems where the AI does not only the detection of a feature, but also performs the entire exam. So it's a development that's going on, of course, and here's the different steps. I think the complexity obviously is getting worse. It's getting more complex the further you go down the development towards autonomous modalities and interpretation of the resulting images. And I think this is without any doubt the goal of these machines that are developed right now. A step beyond that, and I like that part also, is then to have autonomous interventions. So in other words, that the machine decides where to place, for instance, an IV line. So